Hey everybody. At this office, we've been getting more and more questions about digital assets, namely Bitcoin. And as these digital assets become more and more popular in adoption on a daily basis, we thought it'd be good to do a deep dive into what is it, how does it work, and how it might fit in your portfolio. And to help us, we invited along a friend. His name is Jake Galt. He's going to help us do a deep dive into Bitcoin and talk about how it works, its purpose, and how it might be something that you should look at adopting. Jake Galt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, RockTalk. So we're excited to have you on. You know, you and I, we've known each other for, 6 years or so.
Yeah. Dog years. I don't know how much that translates into, but
it's been
quite
a bit.
a while.
Yeah, our families have traveled together, gotten to know each other really well over the last several years, and excited to have you on for today's topic, which you've done a lot to educate me over the last several years on Bitcoin and how it works, you know, just the basics on it, the, how to buy it, how to, should it be something that someone should own? You know, we've talked through a lot of things. I thought it'd be a great time to have you on. It's become, more mainstream. Yep. And I think it's a great time to have you on to really talk through just the basics of it. You know, a lot of our clients ask, Kyle, what is it? How does it work? Should I own it in my, have it in my portfolio and so forth? So I thought we'd talk through some basics today to just kind of break the ice and get people the basic understanding of it. And maybe we can start off. You can tell us a little bit about just your background, how you got to this point, and talk through that a little bit.
Yeah. So again, thanks for having me. I'm glad we could formalize some of the conversations that tend to happen at happy hours and pretty much anywhere else people listen to me talk about this stuff, as you know. I'm a former kind of reformed CPA, inactive, just so that nobody comes after me.
You had too much of a personality.
I heard that a couple times when I was auditing for Ernst & Young. And one of our clients that I was auditing attempted to hire me away into sales, which I was good at numbers, and that was a great deal for me. And so I tried to do that, and then I was stopped by the auditing firm I worked for, which then just lit the fire. I then got into sales, tech sales, started my own firm, and then throughout that time kind of found my way into Bitcoin based on some of the server technology, some of like the more technical side of things. And then just over time, it just started eating away more and more of my kind of attention, so much so that it ended up with me writing a book and quitting my job over it, which my wife was super stoked about, as you know.
We've had a couple conversations. I think wine was involved then because,
that's safe to say.
Right. Changing of careers is a big step.
Yes. So especially considering we worked together at the same firm. So that was quite a curveball. But nonetheless, it's been super exciting. I'm very stoked about, to your point, how much sophistication and up-leveling is coming into the ecosystem, the Bitcoin network. I think there's an inevitability there. And so, I'm just excited that, folks like yourself and your firm are now really taking this by the horns and being a leader in the space, just to show everybody, hey, this isn't just a bunch of crazy magic internet money that, some kooks are playing with on the internet.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin really does have some legitimacy to it, and we're going to spend some time on that, just on the basics of how it works and so forth. And it's something that, over the last year, I've taken a lot of time to educate myself on just how it works. And our industry, of course, is heavily regulated, and the current administration has given us some free rein in there to be able to talk about it now. And now I can have conversations with clients about what is it, how does it work, and so forth. Let's start off with some of the basics. Just we hear every day, we hear Bitcoin, right? Which is how I've referenced it, and you have these conversations all the time. But if we're going to compare it to a dollar bill, so we have a dollar, we have a Bitcoin, but behind a dollar we also have pennies. Well, behind Bitcoin, we have Satoshis. Yeah. And how many Satoshis make up one Bitcoin?
So there's 100 million Satoshis per one Bitcoin. And even beyond that, not to get too much in the weeds, there are also micro Satoshis. So long story short, Bitcoin, as it's called, is pretty much infinitely divisible. Just like you said, you've got dollar bills, you've got $100 bills, you've got pennies and nickels. There are different denominations. The same is true for Bitcoin. The only difference really is Bitcoin is a digital native kind of asset. It was built for the internet, whereas dollars were always used when I bought something from you, I handed you dollars, and now we're like making it work in the digital world by using digital representations of those tokens. We're all familiar with those. You log on to Chase or whatever bank account you have, and then there's your balance. Those are just digital representations of physical dollars. Bitcoin was just always built for that in the first place. And so you can divide it into Satoshis, 100 million of them within each Bitcoin, or even beyond that. And that's kind of, for most people, they're like, well, how are you going to buy a cup of coffee with a Bitcoin? Because you see the price is $118,000 or whatever it is at the moment. And, that's kind of a misrepresentation of the reality. When I went to El Salvador with my wife, you could go to a bar, spend 3,000 Satoshis on one beer or a coffee or whatever. So there are already ways to transact with those pennies and nickels in the Bitcoin space.
Right. Very similar to maybe using a Venmo or a PayPal, something like that, where you transact digitally right there to get a cab, buy a drink, buy a dinner.
Literally with QR codes in the exact same format as a Venmo or a PayPal. And as you know, some of the guys we play golf with, if they want to bet, I'm not really all that into it, but if they do want to, I'm now forcing them to accept Satoshis instead of dollars because I inevitably lose. And when that happens, I'm like, well, this is going to be an orange pill moment for you. At a minimum, I'm going to use this as a learning opportunity.
Right. Yeah. Great way to introduce them.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, we have, gold as an asset that's been around for hundreds of years, right? That's been used to transact and so forth. It's been that commodity. We have the US dollar, and now we have Bitcoin. Let's talk through a little bit about just the differences between each one and why was Bitcoin created and how was it created and so forth, being a decentralized digital asset. So kind of an evolving asset, if you will, right?
Yep.
Maybe talk through that a little bit.
Yeah. So, man, this could go pretty deep, but starting with gold, like humanity kind of settled upon gold being the best way of storing our value and exchanging, really solving for what's called the coincidence of needs. So back in the day, if I had corn and you had goats, we could transact as long as I needed or wanted goats and you needed or wanted corn. But as soon as that stopped, we needed some other representation of value that we agreed upon in order to do that. Gold became the best representation of that simply due to some of its, it's durable, it's stock to flow. So there's not a lot more of it mined every year, right? There's a very consistent amount. It's relatively scarce. So there's all these different properties that gold satisfied, and humans kind of settled upon that. Well, fast forward, dollars were created because some of the things that some of the attributes of gold didn't really lend itself to being money. For example, if I needed a certain amount of goats from you, right? I'm like carving off parts of gold if a coin wasn't the appropriate amount. Like the divisibility was strange. Or if I was going to go buy a ton of them, then I'd have to bring bars. Then now there's a security element, right?
And we're measuring purity and all kinds of things.
All kinds of things.
Right.
So we had these representations of gold that were dollar bills, right? So now we start using dollar bills. Well, this all kind of falls apart on or around 1971 when they removed gold backing from dollars. Now we're just transacting in dollars. Fast forward to Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he, she, or they may be. We can get into that in a little bit. Back in 2008, we were all going through the financial crisis. For those of us who were around for that, untold numbers of dollar bills were being injected into the system. And one of the things in the very first block in the blockchain that Satoshi Nakamoto put in was Chancellor is on the brink of yet another bailout. And so everyone took this to kind of represent the fact that like I'm unsubscribing from your limitless dollars and I'm going to create something with a perfectly finite amount, which is 21 million.
21 million Bitcoin were created initially.
And that's all that will ever be created.
That's right.
It's bound by math. It's bound by an algorithm, and no one can create more of it. And so really, the reason it was made was, A, it addressed some of the shortcomings of both dollars and gold in divisibility, portability, all of these things. But most importantly, no one could manipulate it. No one could just hit a button and 1 trillion more of it shows up tomorrow, like some currencies that we've seen. And so really it's kind of unsubscribing from broken systems and giving the users of the network, the Bitcoin network, a digital native representation of value.
So if I'm hearing you right, what Satoshi attempted to do was to take a step back and say, look, gold had its purpose in value there for a while, and it worked for a while. The dollar also did that, but let's see if we can take this a step further, because we've evolved and now we have computers and the internet and everything. Can we create a better, more efficient currency? Right?
Yeah, and I think it doesn't necessarily need to replace all things because you can't ornamentally wear Bitcoin, right? Gold will always have value because humans value things that look nice, that are durable. Gold is about as good as it can get, so it won't replace everything. As you know, I tend to say it's typically not A or B; it's A and B, and this holds true for Bitcoin as well. Bitcoin is not only a commodity. It's also a store of value, and it can also be a currency, right? So we try and shoehorn it into like being a specific thing, but really it's not A or B when it comes to that. It solves some of the issues like we talked about that gold has in terms of like securely transporting it over, geopolitical barriers, right, around the world, shipping bars of gold between the United States and New York and London.
Rumor has it there's still a few bars at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, absolute. Rumor has it there's some bars in Fort Knox, but we still don't know. But that's a whole different conversation.
Right. So 21 million Bitcoin were created initially. Today,
Yes.
there are about 19 million in circulation.
Correct.
And so with that, every several years, every 4 years, more are released. And along the way, there are small amounts. And so we won't really go down this path today. But if you want to give us maybe just a quick idea of what that means in mining and how they're released.
Look, Bitcoin is literally just a ledger that says Jake has sent Kyle X amount of value, right, as represented by the tokens, which are Bitcoin. This is distributed among computers across the world. Now, no one would have any incentive to stand up computers and consume electricity in order to codify that I paid you something unless there was an incentive to do that. The incentive is Bitcoin rewards. So every 10 minutes, there's another block on the blockchain. And to your point, without getting too deep, all that is saying these transactions happened. Now these transactions happen.
So to think of this in a way, I think of my grandparents, that they wrote down everything in their checkbook, debits and credits.
Yes.
They tracked every penny. I remember they did this for decades. Mm-hmm. They tracked everything. They could pull out a receipt from 1984. Mm-hmm. And so what's happening here is if we make a transaction, I buy a cup of coffee, that transaction goes on that ledger, and someone's verifying that is an accurate transaction, and they get rewarded in small little Satoshis for doing that.
Quite literally, yes. That's exactly what's happening. And oh, by the way, instead of your grandparents having to tick and tie their debits and credits with whatever their bank's debits and credits were and figuring out where those differences are and there being a third party, and now it's just immediately happening. It's on a blockchain and everyone can go look at it. It's publicly audited every 10 minutes, right? And which is another reason why when people say, oh, bad people use Bitcoin, it's like, well, candidly, that's the worst thing for them to use. Yes, they will use it. I mean, there's a history there with Silk Road and others, but ultimately, if you're going to do bad things, I think you would just use cash as opposed to something that's being audited every 10 minutes.
So let's go through a little bit of the timeline, the history of Bitcoin. So created back in 2008, supposedly by Satoshi Nakamoto. Right. No one knows for sure.
Correct.
Right. If he did create it, if that's the name, he kind of went dark and no one's heard from him, since then, or he didn't admit that he created it.
Well, yeah, nobody had heard of Satoshi prior to this name popping up on message boards among cypherpunks, all of whom, by the way, were trying to create a perfect digital currency. There were a number of them created along the way. Bitcoin was by no means the first. In fact, Bitcoin took a bunch of the positive things that other ones had done in the decades prior to 2008 and kind of put them together into a system that became Bitcoin. So this is why some people think maybe Satoshi isn't just one person. Maybe it's a bunch of the people who were working on these things. Maybe it was one person tied in with all these people. Interestingly enough, some of these people who had created digital currencies prior to got tied up with the federal government, and some were arrested. So it's really not shocking that somebody might not want to be known if they were coming up with a currency that might threaten the currencies of the world and the world's government's power over them. So I'm not particularly shocked that Satoshi didn't want to be found. What's most interesting is Satoshi has 1 million Bitcoin in his or her or their wallet, and not a single one has moved. So either they are hyper disciplined because they're, I think, the third richest person in the world now, and counting, or they're dead. So either way, to your point earlier about there being 19 million in circulation, 1 million of them have never moved. In fact, there's apparently another 3 or 4 million that people suspect are lost forever. And this is why I think what you guys are doing at EdgeRock is helpful, and the broader sophistication in the space. Because back in the day, it was the Wild West, right? The people who were trying to figure this out and play with it, like, they'd throw away a computer and there goes 1,000 Bitcoin, right?
Their passwords were on there on how to access it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Then they accidentally throw the wrong hard drive away. I mean, there's stories about these people digging up, landfills trying to find what is now $1 billion, and like your heart goes out to them. But
right.
Ultimately, the Michael Saylors of the world and some of the prominent voices say, hey, thank you for your contribution. Now Bitcoin is even more scarce.
Right.
So
right.
I guess there's a silver lining there, depending on which side of that conversation.
Some different ways to look at it. Or the very first transaction where someone first bought something was someone using Bitcoin to purchase 2 Domino's pizzas. And they spent 10,000 Bitcoin to do that, which would be worth a significant...
over $1 billion at this point.
Over $1 billion for 2 pizzas, right?
Yeah.
The guy probably still isn't sleeping.
Interestingly, though, at that time, he was in a chat room, and everyone, was saying, hey, what is this? You can't even use Bitcoin to buy anything. And he's like, want to bet? He's like, I'm going to use it to buy something that everyone needs, food. And he found somebody across the world who would order him a pizza, and they ordered it to his address, and he sent them the Bitcoin. And at the time, that was a pioneering move. In fact, I think he was just inducted into the Bitcoin Hall of Fame. I don't know if that's worth $1 billion, but I mean, it still did. It was a proof of potential. Right. And you just hope that he probably bought another, a few thousand Bitcoin.
Hopefully he grabbed a few more along the way.
Yeah.
So we started off all the way back, in 2008, and we have a guy back in 2010, the first transaction buying a couple pizzas, to where today we have JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon linking up with Coinbase, and them, working out a way to make it easier and more feasible for people to purchase Bitcoin and make transactions and so forth. So we've come a long ways. It's becoming much more mainstream. And, we look at the current administration where they've passed some laws and done some things to make this more mainstream and more accessible. And we'll get into here in a moment talking about different ways to purchase Bitcoin. There are different paths to do that. And, we're going to work with our clients in different ways to allow them maybe a couple different paths, whether it's through an ETF. Fidelity, who we use their platform, that's who we custody with. Fidelity, they've been mining Bitcoin since, I believe it's 2014. So they've been at this for a long time, and they offer cold storage, which is a way to purchase it and kind of keep it offline, so it's a little more safe. Maybe talk about that just for a moment. Just in terms of the safety of we touched on it there. We don't want to lose those passwords, those keys, and so forth.
Well, it is an amazing time to be already into or getting into the Bitcoin network because of everything you just described. What once was the Wild West has up-leveled immensely. I mean, it's just going vertical now in terms of, sophistication in the space. To your point, major players are now jumping in. The risk of this thing just being some crazy, thing that could just disappear tomorrow becomes less by the day as nation states get involved in having their treasuries and, strategic reserves.
Companies are holding this on their balance sheet. When they have extra cash, they're taking some of that money, and instead of buying a treasury, right, they're also buying Bitcoin as a piece of that balance sheet.
And all of these different players need different ways to secure your Bitcoin. To your point, you can't just have like JP Morgan Chase involved with something where if a computer goes down, all of that is gone, right? So obviously there are now developers and all sorts of solutions being introduced into the space that are helping people to in a more sophisticated way secure their Bitcoin. To your point, there's anything from cold storage to leaning on a third party via an ETF to even buying a proxy stock, like you talked about, like a strategy, who basically, in effect, is stockpiling Bitcoin in their treasury because they believe in the fundamentals so much. There is no one size fits all, right? And that's kind of what's amazing about this is, when I went to El Salvador, I have basically a Venmo style wallet that's got, whatever, a few $100 or $1,000 in Bitcoin on it. That is much more subject to being lost or taken, frankly, than one that you have stored in cold storage, to your point, which is more akin to putting it in, if not a bank account, maybe a safe deposit box.
A safe deposit box, like taking bars of gold, putting it in that safe deposit box, so it's more protected, right?
And so in essence, you just need to kind of, as a person who's accumulating Bitcoin, figure out where it makes most sense to have which amounts of Bitcoin. If you're not going to spend any of your Bitcoin in any near term, there's no sense in having a ton on any hot wallet, like a Venmo style wallet. Strike is a good example. You could have it all in cold storage. If you don't want to deal with like, hey, I have to maintain control and security over this, you just don't want any part of that, that's when you get into some of the ETFs you talked about. There are different ways that people feel comfortable with different levels of self-custody, right? And this is, I think, where you guys at EdgeRock are doing a wonderful, wonderful thing for all of your clients to say, hey, what does that look like for you? And we can help no matter what the answer is there.
Yeah, so when we're looking at those different paths, we have ETFs, where basically same thing as a mutual fund. And what we've done is we have our array of portfolios that are income, conservative, moderate growth, aggressive growth, all the way through. And they have certain allocations across the market in a broad way. What we've done is take those exact allocations and duplicate them and mixed in a small allocation to Fidelity's Bitcoin ETF, anywhere from 2 to 4%. So a small allocation across the board. And then that way, if clients want that in their portfolio, they can have it. If they don't, they can keep with our regular allocations. So one way is through ETFs. Another way, which we've just hit on there, is where kind of like, if I've got those bars of gold, where do I keep them?
Right.
So they're more safe, right? Do I want to keep them in my house, right? In this case, what we can do is we can purchase Bitcoin, and Fidelity is going to hold it in what's called cold storage. And what that term means is that it's offline. It's not online where it can be hacked.
Right.
So that way it's sitting there. It's just going to fluctuate in value with whatever Bitcoin does on a daily basis. And then if I want that, then I call up EdgeRock, and we'll work with Fidelity to transact or move that gold or Bitcoin to you. Right?
And this mitigates your clients potentially losing their keys and in one swoop just losing access to all of that Bitcoin.
That's right.
So this is an amazing, this helps to avoid digging up a dump site because all of your Bitcoin's gone. This is where
I don't have any clients that want to spend times in a dump site. No.
Yeah, I can't imagine that that's
it's
very
100
fun.
degrees out. It's hot. So we don't need that one. So let's talk about this. Our clients come to us and they ask us a lot of questions about Bitcoin. One of the most common ones I get is, Kyle, is it a good investment? Am I missing out by not owning it or, right now or, owning it in the past? So, maybe talk to that a little bit about is it too late or am I missing out and not holding it? And I'll definitely add some points in there.
Well, as your friend who is irresponsibly long on it, you might be shocked to know that I think it is good to have some. Again, your mileage will vary, right, depending on your risk tolerance. The interesting part about Bitcoin is, though, once upon a time, not so long ago, the adage was, you should have some Bitcoin, but don't put any more into it than you're okay with losing, right? Increasingly, it's getting really interesting where the Ray Dalios of the world, these billionaires are saying, hey, I don't know if 5% is enough. Maybe it's north of 10 for those who are not as risk averse, right? So again, I'm not here, and certainly this is more your world, here to tell anyone what's right for them. I would say that having some is a very prudent measure, it's like Michael Saylor says, it's like buying real estate in New York 100 years ago. There's only so much of it, right? And now, even at the time, if it were expensive 50 years ago, we look back on those prices and we're like, oh man, I'd buy as much as I could, right? So for all of those who are like, well, Bitcoin's already gone so far up, did I miss it? I would say no, we're still so early. Just think about how many people in your life at this point. That's how early we are. Similar to internet year 2000.
Yeah, it's not widely adopted yet.
Correct.
Right, and it's becoming that way. We're not recommending it across the board to clients, but it's something that what we're wanting to do is educate our clients on it and have that discussion to see, okay, does it make sense to add that in as a piece of their portfolio in different manners?
Right.
Maybe it's through an ETF, maybe it's through cold storage, maybe they want to go purchase it on their own through a platform and actually hold the keys themselves. There are different ways to do it. And, I always look at it as like a menu at a restaurant. All right. I don't like everything on a menu, right?
Sure.
But there are certain things that I do like. And so I want to know what's on the menu and does it make sense for me?
Right.
Right. Every family is different. Every person is different. And so that way, I think if you're informed and educated, then you can make that decision as to whether or not that makes sense or not. Yeah. Right.
And I think you and I have talked about it, in terms of like having a correlated or non-correlated portfolio. Bitcoin acts in line with some of the major indicators sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. And all I would caution against, and you may have probably a lot more thoughts on this, is if you are allocating some amount into Bitcoin, just don't try and time the market.
No.
This is they call it HODL, right? You're holding for some long period of time, right? Don't think that you're going to come in and just like run the number go up thing and sell. And then history is, there are all these different posts of people saying, oh, I'm glad I sold it at $300 because, man, it just tanked to 50. And then people are like, is this guy still alive? So, no, and he's like, no, but I am alive, but I'm dead inside.
Yes. Yeah,
so
he missed out on
it's
that
a long term.
Right, and it's in the same approach we take with we look at this Bitcoin as a commodity, just like gold. When it comes to the investments that we manage for families, we've always our approach has always been time in the market, not timing the market. And so, purchasing this, understanding that it is volatile. When any investment starts out, or in this case, a commodity, or however we're wanting to look at this, or a currency, when it's just getting going, it is more volatile. It's like taking off in an airplane. When is that more volatile, right? It's when we're taking off, we get those shakes a little bit, but when we're at 35,000 feet,
cruising,
it's a little better, right? And so I think I look at Bitcoin, in a way that, it's been around since around 2008, and there was extreme volatility in there. We're still going to see a lot of volatility. It's maybe gotten a little bit better. When we look at its correlation to the S&P 500 and other places of the market, there is some correlation, but it's not a one-to-one correlation. And one of the things that you mentioned, Ray Dalio, one of the things I love about Ray Dalio, and I think that he has this right. So Ray manages a large fund for institutional investors out there that, one of the things, the philosophies of Ray that I love is that, he's always recommended to have at least 10 different non-correlated investments or low correlation, right? So let's say real estate, some stocks, in this case maybe gold, Bitcoin, and so forth, right? Where they have low correlation. And how can we add in more and more investments? The kind of the sweet spot that Goldilocks is having 10 to 15 non-correlated or low correlated investments. And Bitcoin may add in one of those pieces of that puzzle that may make sense.
Yep.
And so I love that piece, looking to, educate yourself so you can feel more comfortable to see, okay, does this make sense for me to have this in a portfolio? So let's say that I've educated myself on this a little bit. I understand it a little bit better now. What's the best way to purchase Bitcoin?
Well, again, this is when I think you need to speak with your advisor as to what's best for you.
That's right.
I mean, in all reality, that is the best approach. It's, hey, I feel most comfortable with this approach. What do I miss out on, or what am I risking by doing that? That's where you guys can really be, leading by example, saying, look, here's what we personally do. These are the options that you have within EdgeRock, all of these different ways of buying and holding. Again, when I first got involved in this, the only real options were you went on an exchange, you tried to get money into it somehow, and the banks were kind of stopping you from doing that anyways. Fast forward just, a handful of years later, and now Jamie Dimon's talking about it on CNBC this morning. I mean, it's a wild time to see some of that. But yeah, I mean, there is no one size. The space, as we talked about already, is up leveling in so many ways. Lloyd's of London is now providing insurance behind some of, people's holdings. So you guys staying on top of this, you're going to be able to say, hey, here's actually what's happening in the space. Maybe this is good for you to consider. This didn't even exist 6 months ago, but now so many people needed that same thing that you do that they actually developed it into the Bitcoin space. So I think it's something that you could probably help them with. The easiest path that a lot of people find, be it with 401ks, IRAs, or just mutual funds, to your point, there are so many vehicles now that they can just allocate to within the market. That is just literally, you guys are able to do that for them without a ton of the gyration. Now, that may be a good first step to get exposure while you're building in some follow-on steps to say, hey, maybe I do want some element of that safe deposit box style self-custody. Maybe that's not for all of it, right? So this is where I think a conversation with EdgeRock and your team is going to be beneficial for people.
I think that's a great point. And one of the things that has concerned me about this space is when I look at because it is a newer, coin, currency, commodity, however we want to frame it, there aren't any companies that allow you to purchase it that have been doing this for 20, 30 years that we can go look at it as a track record. A lot of these companies are 5 years old, and there's not, much of a track record behind them. If I'm going to purchase it, that's why, starting out, maybe doing that through a Fidelity may make sense, right? Where I've got that big name, I'm feeling a little more secure about how it's purchased and so forth to do that versus a startup that's out there, that's trying to compete.
Based on the relative age of the entirety of the crypto space, by definition, most of the players are within a decade, if not just over that, right? So, I think it's a nice blend of some of the traditional finance powerhouses that are getting involved now. And again, just adding a level of sophistication to the space that give people the warm fuzzies like, hey, this isn't some fly-by-night. I mean, Bitcoin gets lumped in with all of the other kind of, we'll call them altcoins just to keep this PG. There are other names for them that are not as nice, but the FTXs of the world. There are just the brief history of crypto is just full of examples of fraudsters and people trying to take advantage of people wanting to understand, hey, should I be involved in this? And I heard about this other thing, and it's frankly guilt by association. And I think a lot of the fraudsters capitalized on the fact that everyone in the space was new. So it wasn't glaring or a problem that they were also new. And by the way, we're just doing it different than everybody else. So don't worry that the fundamentals don't make any sense. Again, I think the Fidelities getting involved lend a level of credibility that just hasn't existed in the space. And, again, due to a number of factors, the whole space is up leveling as a result in the last couple of years, for sure.
That's right. There are literally thousands of different types of coins out there all over the place, but few of them are stable backed and so forth.
Yeah,
and again, how was Bitcoin created? It was created in a way that was hopefully, a more advanced, way to transact and so forth. It was offline it was much more thoughtful in terms of how it was put together. So we talked a little bit about, and I liken this to, like someone can go purchase gold through an ETF. Someone can purchase Bitcoin through an ETF. They can buy gold, hold it in their house. They can put it in a storage, a safety deposit box. If they're going to keep it in their house or it's jewelry, that's that self-custody, right? You never want to lose a ring. You never want to, have anything happen. I remember my sister when she was about 3 years old, I'm going to throw her under the bus here for half a second. I'm sure I'll hear about this one. But when she was about 3, she had this tendency. She wanted to throw everything in the trash. She was playing with my mom's wedding ring. And That was the last time we saw it.
Oh, no.
We think it ended up in the trash, right? That's the best guess to this day. And losing that's a pretty hefty loss, right? So that self-custody, it gives you more control, but also you don't want to lose it. So if someone does take the step of self-custody where they actually want to be in more control of that Bitcoin, then they hold what are called the keys, which are passwords. They're small words. It's usually 12 or 24 words that you don't want to lose those words. Those words give you the ability to make transactions and to do whatever you want. So you're in more control, but that responsibility is now on you.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
So, do you want to shift that responsibility to a Fidelity that's going to hold those keys or through those ETFs? So different ways to custody.
And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be entirely A or B, right? So again, one of the advancements in the space, probably, I don't know, in the last 5 or so years, there are stories of people like writing these words down on a napkin, coffee spills, however many Bitcoin are just
Good
gone
luck.
forever.
Right.
Gone.
Yep.
Just tragic. So what kind of some developers created was what's called multi-signature, just meaning instead of just one set of keys or words, now there are 3, right? That doesn't really do you much good if you have to custody all of them, because most people are just putting them in the same storage place anyways, which you've not really accomplished much.
No.
So what you can do, though, is I hold one set, EdgeRock holds a set, and Fidelity holds a set. So now, in order to transact with the Bitcoin, you need 2 out of the 3 keys. So I can't do it by myself, but I can call y'all up and say, hey, let's put ours together. I need to move some of this. Great. If I lose mine, now I have 2 sophisticated players in EdgeRock and Fidelity who have my back, and I've not lost the Bitcoin, right? So there's a way that now you can kind of do an in-between where it's not just all on you. And I think this just speaks volumes to, the fact that the ecosystem and the network are creating not a one-size-fits-all, but like whatever this may look like and whatever is most suitable for you, and it's probably multiple of them, not just all in one in particular, catering to whatever those needs might be.
Yeah, and that's going to help to maintain that safety a little bit, so we're not digging through dumpsters.
Yes, let's avoid that.
Yeah, and also, occasionally we'll have a client that wants to make a transaction, and our job as a fiduciary is to always ask them, hey, we'll get clients calling us up asking us, hey, I need $50,000, and as a fiduciary, we always need to ask. Happy to send that to you today. We'll get right on that. Can I ask why? Mm-hmm. Hey, we're remodeling the house. Great. Let's get that over to you. But if we're buying pizzas with it, our job as fiduciaries is to step in and maybe, hey, let's see if we can find a better way to take care and buy those pizzas, right? We don't need to pull out $50,000 for that. So our job is, I think that always being there. One of the things I always tell clients, if we're making a large transaction or if we're making a big decision, just call EdgeRock. Right? Let's talk through it. Let's see what's going on. Is there a better way to pay for this? What's the best account to pull from? I think this leads us into a great area here, which is, okay, let's say I am going to make a transaction. I'm going to use my Bitcoin for something. Bitcoin can be taxed. The IRS is going to tax us. The IRS always has their hands in that cookie jar, right? So there are different ways for us to own this. We can own it with an IRA, which I believe that you've done, I think.
Yes.
Maybe a Roth IRA.
Both, yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So you can own it with a traditional IRA where the tax basically grows tax postponed is what I like to say. Yeah. We're just postponing that tax. We're going to pay it someday, or our kids are going to pay it. That tax is postponed. Roth IRAs, as long as we're following the rules, that's tax-free in the long run. And then we have just cash, brokerage account where we go buy a Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And then if we sell that, then we're either going to pay a long-term capital gains tax if we've held it for more than a year. If it's under a year, then we're going to pay ordinary income taxes, right?
Speaking
my
language.
You know this.
Speaking my language.
Right.
This is also why I'm inactive now.
Yes.
Because I'm like having PTSD.
Let the professionals handle all that for you with a CPA to do that tax planning.
No, this is something that as a inactive CPA and someone who's irresponsibly long Bitcoin, I am very interested in how this plays out. Now, the current administration introduced the idea that perhaps smaller transactions will not be taxed. So, for example, the Venmo style payment, one person to another, they're not going to tax you on the gains from whatever that Bitcoin is or Satoshis are that you're sending over. I don't know that we have any real clarity on that yet. It's going to be very interesting in terms of, how this plays out. But I think this speaks to what you mentioned it as use a conversation with EdgeRock to talk about what the most appropriate path would be going forward, because you don't want to just willy-nilly move a bunch of stuff around, especially if Bitcoin has appreciated like it has in the recent history and suddenly trigger a massive taxable event, right? So
Correct.
This is all the more reason why what y'all are doing in this space and leading, right, in your space is of vast importance to your clients, because anyone who is playing with Bitcoin is going to have some level of this consideration that needs to be front and center and top of mind. For anyone listening, of course, I've paid all of the appropriate taxes on any amount of Bitcoin that I've ever transacted.
State and federal. Done.
Of course. Right. I just want to make that clear. But I think that's another part of where the space is maturing, I guess I'd say. And I'm not sure that we really have line of sight, because to your point earlier, is it a commodity? Is it a currency? Those have different tax treatments, right? So depending on the view of the underlying, that's got a much different implication from a taxability perspective in terms of how that's treated ultimately. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. I don't think we yet know, but again, all the more reason to talk to you guys before doing anything by moving funds around or liquidating Bitcoin or what have you.
The answer is always call EdgeRock. We'll work to get it figured out for you. So we've covered a lot just on the basics of Bitcoin up to this point. Anything else you'd like to add in just in kind of that Bitcoin 101 as we're trying to, kind of put our toes in the water just to understand it, right? We're not making any recommendations, not making any advice here as to whether someone should own it in any way, whether it's a currency or commodity or anything. But let's educate ourselves on it so we understand more about it.
Yeah.
And then we can make, maybe a better decision as to, okay, do I want to continue down this path of learning more about it? And maybe it does make sense in some fashion, right, for me and my family. Or maybe I say it's not for me. But anything else to add in on kind of the Bitcoin 101?
I think you're hitting the mark on that. When I initially was trying to, frankly, orange pill you and all of our friends, essentially, it was always, oh, you should buy Bitcoin. You should buy Bitcoin. And I just felt passionately like everyone needed some exposure to Bitcoin because I had gone so deep down the rabbit hole. And then I realized like that's not the right statement. The right statement is you should understand Bitcoin, right? You should learn about Bitcoin. And if you choose to not participate, that's fine, right? But you at least should know what you're choosing to participate or not participate in. And I think so often it's lost on people that they should just know more about it. Like they hear somebody say it's pixie dust on the internet or bad people use it or any, it uses the world's...
I could lose it.
I could lose it all, right? All the FUD that's out there. Just do more research, learn more about what it actually is. And the deeper you go, inevitably, the more interested you are in A, learning more, and B, probably having some. I'm not saying you're going to go exactly as crazy as I have, but ultimately, the more you know about it, the deeper you go. And I would just implore everyone, like, just learn more about it. Don't just think it's something that it's everything I don't know about computers with everything I don't know about money, and how am I going to know about that? Right?
Right.
It's actually far more straightforward once you start diving in, and it touches on multiple facets of life. I think it's more of a philosophical journey than anything. So I just ask that people, look at it more like, hey, I'd like to know more about that. Whether or not I choose to participate in the network and the ecosystem, that's a different thing entirely. But just know what you're opting out of, right? Opting out of something you don't understand just because you've never tried to understand it isn't the right way to go about doing it.
Sure. It's the exact same path of if maybe I've rented an apartment for for 10 years out of college and I'm looking at purchasing my first home. If I don't purchase that home,
right.
I'm opting out and I'm deciding to stay where I'm at. But let's educate ourselves on it. so he can make a more informed decision. Does it make sense to actually do something there? And I think what's going to happen with all this is a lot of the listeners are going to have a lot of questions, and we would love to hear from them, right?
Totally.
And please respond back with questions. That way we can answer those and continue this discussion and maybe take it a little bit deeper as we move forward.
I'd love to do that, and you can slide into my DMs on X. I'm at whoisjake Galt. So if there are any questions you want to deep dive, I'd love to do more of these with you beyond the just 101 level. I mean, I wrote a book on this, right? So like I'm clearly passionate about it. And there are a lot of books out there. I actually have a reading list at the back of my book. The more you go deep, the more it just kind of hooks you if you're like paying attention. And it's just a fascinating space. So yeah, I'd love to talk more about it. As you know, it's my favorite pastime. So much so that I catch some flack for it amongst our friends, but I can't help myself.
We love giving you a hard time. So,
yeah.
Jake, this has been great.
Yeah, thanks, man.
I just encourage everyone, throw your questions at us. Let us know what questions you have. We'd be happy to answer those. Like and subscribe, and we'll be back with more information down the road.
Sounds good, bud.
All right, thanks,
Fun.
man.
Yeah,
great having you on.
Thanks.